Take it away, Mel.
Okay. Hi, Andy. Yeah, Mel Woods from AAP. I guess, can you just maybe talk us through the last 24 hours getting this across the line and sort of how things played out?
Yeah, well, it was a very emotive last 24 hours. But yeah, just a really big team effort, obviously with our staff working closely with the Queensland government in getting the managed isolation approved, which was the biggest piece of the puzzle. We already had confirmation of the match schedule a couple of days ago, so it was just really getting through this managed isolation piece. And literally minutes before we jumped onto our SANZAAR call last night, I got the confirmation from the Premier's office and the DG. So yeah, that was obviously very welcome news and very well received by our SANZAAR partners, as getting the Queensland scenario through was the preferred position of the SANZAAR CEOs. And just delighted that we've been able to get it across the line, and a really good opportunity for rugby in Queensland and rugby in this country.
When you said it was the preferred location for the SANZAAR CEOs, is that unanimous, or was there some dissension there?
No, we had an initial call on back end of last week, I think Thursday and Friday, and it was always the preferred position to secure the Queensland option. Yes, other alternatives around South Africa and Europe were put on the table and explored, but the parties were certainly very keen to see if we could get this option revised. Obviously, with a great emphasis from South Africa and Argentina, because they're the ones that were having to do the long haul travel into this.
Andy, Jim Tucker, were there any special requests from New Zealand, seeing the masters of special requests?
No, none. I mean, they, as has been so widely communicated, that they wanted they wanted the certainty of the schedule. But obviously, once we were able to put it up, what the Queensland option was going to look like, and the rotation of the games across the three stadiums, there's unanimous support and everybody very comfortable and happy with what we presented last night.
With their game, clearly there's a really significant game in their history, with the 100th test between South Africa and New Zealand being scheduled for Townsville. That would be the second game, I'm guessing, or maybe the first or second game. What would the timing of that be for the Townsville game? Would that be a 6 o'clock New Zealand kickoff or an 8 o'clock New Zealand kickoff? Are some of those fine things been resolved yet?
Not yet, Jim. That's something that the SANZAAR team are working through with the broadcasters at this point in time. It's scheduled to be the third game in the 4-game series, in terms of the third weekend, should I say. So we're just waiting for the broadcasters and SANZAAR to go through that in terms of what the preferred kickoff times are. Obviously, acknowledging that there's broadcast markets in both. But I think the important thing for everyone to understand is, whilst there are all double headers, there are certain games that are home games for South Africa and certain games are home games for Argentina and New Zealand and Australia. So I think we've got to balance that in terms of the kickoff times, so that it hits those markets outside of Australasia at a reasonable time.
Oh, that makes good sense. Could I ask you, so this Queensland blueprint in total was presented, New Zealand had seen that last week before they sent out their advisory about not going to Perth?
Yeah, well, New Zealand or all parties were aware that we were obviously just working on the managed isolation piece that wasn't confirmed last week, and that's what we were working hard to try and get done by Friday, but it obviously wasn't possible. But in terms of the other schedule of games on the 12th, the 18th, the 25th, and the 2nd, everyone knew that those were possible and were confirmed, should I say. We just couldn't press the button on it, Jim, without having confirmation of South Africa and Argentina's ability to do managed isolation and prepare adequately for the test matches.
Okay. If there was a little bit of friction between Australia and New Zealand prior to this announcement, the latest round of dialogue? How's the, I guess, the relationship, to use that word, having something this concrete on the table now?
Oh, look, I mean, from my perspective, I'm just going to continue to be professional and conduct ourselves in a professional way, and really what's good for the game and what's good for the outcome of the game in all of our markets. So, you know, everyone is on the same page, thankfully, and aligned to making sure that this Rugby Championship is a success.
Thanks, Andy.
Andy, can you just describe how you think the relationship is between Australia and New Zealand and Mark Robinson?
Chris, I think it's competitive. You know, we both countries, as it always has been within the SANZAAR joint venture. It's one of those unique constructs where you're the fiercest of rivals on the field, and you're all wanting to get the best possible advantage over each other at any given point. So, look, I'm not going to deny the fact it's been challenging, but I think COVID has presented everyone with very unique challenges, and it's how we react and we deal with those challenges that becomes a defining point going forward. And you know, as I said, we certainly are now wanting to move forward, and we'll continue to behave in a professional manner in terms of our engagements with New Zealand going forward.
Andy, can I just ask, once Queensland was an option, was there any push last night from anyone from South Africa or Argentina or New Zealand to go to Europe anyway, or was once Queensland was an option, that was it? There was no discussion from that point on.
Yeah, there was no further discussion, to be honest. Once we put that on the table, everyone was comfortable.
Can you just, Andy, clarify why was Australia very much the preferred position over Europe?
Because that was where the original plan had been put in place. You know, we were originally going to quarantine the guys through New South Wales, and then look at the option either in Perth, or as it became more apparent later in Queensland. I think everybody had initially prepared themselves when we looked at the construct of the Rugby Championship this year. It was always going to be held between the two countries, between Australia and New Zealand. When New Zealand's position changed because of the COVID outbreak, Australia remained the preferred option, and hence I think everyone just believed that we needed to close that loop before we looked at anything else.
And the Perth Bledisloe test, it's in there, but the date to be confirmed. When do you think you actually have confirmation on that? Is that after this weekend's AFL matches?
Christian, I'm working quite closely with both the stadium and the Deputy Premier Roger Cook in trying to get a finality. We'd like finality sooner rather than later, preferably not before the weekend, in terms of what that date is. So I'm hopeful we can get some confirmation in the next 24 to 48 hours.
Thanks.
Andy, it's Ian from Reuters. I just want to ask, mate, how do the competition's financials now stack up for Rugby Australia with this rejig schedule? Is it negligible, or is there some impact there?
There's without a doubt an impact because we've lost a huge opportunity in terms of the budgets and the P&Ls that are presented for some of the games that have taken place in New Zealand. And again, it's operating within a COVID-induced environment. Our costs have increased as we had expected with the quarantine and additional requirements around that. And then, you know, we've got to model on a worst case scenario in terms of the crowd size that we're going to have available in Brisbane, because or in Queensland, should I say, because at this stage, you know, no one can give absolute certainty it's going to be at full noise the whole way through.
But is this the best sort of possible scenario you could have hoped to have, rather than send games to overseas markets?
Oh, look, the overseas market presented on paper a really good outcome as well. You know, it obviously would have given us a slightly improved financial position had we looked at that option. But again, there was a huge amount of work that still had to be done, and a huge part of that was going to be hinging on our ability to sell tickets for four weekends in a shortened period of time. So there was inherent risk on both sides of the options that were considered.
And just the last one, are the quarantine restrictions in Queensland, are they any different to previous bubbles that we've seen, like in last year's Tri Nations?
No, Ian. We've modelled it straight off what we did for the French during the series here in July. So it will give both South Africa and Argentina the ability to train and prepare adequately through that 2-week period. And bearing in mind, because of the delay in finalising all of this, South Africa and Argentina only due to arrive here on this Friday, which will mean they'll get out of quarantine on the Friday before the first test. So it was really important that both of them were able to prepare as they would under normal circumstances, obviously, but just within a managed isolation environment.
Okay.
So, Andy, that's the reason the first test's on the Sunday, particularly to give them the extra bit of breathing space there?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Andy, you mentioned before some tests are home for some nations and you'll want to play those in suitable time zones. Does that mean we could see, like, for example, a 3 p.m. Queensland time kickoff for South African mornings, or would you kick them off later? And could you see a spaced out, like would it be a 3 p.m. kickoff and then a 7 p.m. kickoff, or do you want to ideally have them back to back for TV viewers here?
I think ideally we'd like to have them in close succession, because you also got to be cognizant of the fans that are coming into the stadium, that they're haven't got a big hiatus between two games. I think when we talk about, Sam, the sort of home and away fixtures of the teams, it's, you know, if it's, for example, a South African or an Argentinian game, you know, this is just my thoughts. It's not necessarily the way SANZAAR is going to go. You would think that the later we can kick those off in Australia, the better, because then it'll hit those markets at a reasonable time in the morning, as opposed to playing at sort of 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon, which will be really early in the morning. So that's just something that SANZAAR and the broadcasters and the unions need to work through as to what the best schedule would look like.
Hi, Andy. Dave Polkinghorn from the Canberra Times. Sorry, I was jumped in a bit late, so sorry if you've already answered this, but just sort of seeing what your thoughts going forward in regards to, I guess, test matches coming back to Canberra.
Oh, as you know, mate, we're all quite excited about the opportunity to have a test there on the 2nd, or the last round of the Rugby Championship, and so, you know, we'll continue to work with the ACT government around those opportunities going forward, should they present. I think it's fair to say it's a pretty unique set of circumstances we've had over the last 2 years, where, you know, we've had pretty much the whole Rugby Championship based in Australia, which has given us the content and given us the volume that we can look outside of the traditional stadiums that have been used historically, you know. So we've also got another big thing around the Rugby World Cup that we're working hard towards, and I think that certainly will provide opportunities for some of the not so big stadiums around the country going forward, to have some games or have some involvement going forward.
So sort of fair to say you're hopeful of potentially next year there could be some opportunities for Canberra?
Oh, it's all going to depend on what the schedule looks like, to be honest. If we've only got our customary 3 tests as part of the Rugby Championship here, we already have a number of agreements in place with other states around that. So that would be unlikely at this stage.
Andy, could I ask you, just in really broad terms, the financials, if it is, say, a New Zealand home game being held at the Gold Coast, does the gate takings for that match directly go to New Zealand, or is it all put in a pot separately now and divided as per a formula? What's the complication formula there?
Yeah, no, you any of the games that are played between round 4 and the last 4 rounds, should I say, are pooled together, and that's an equal share amongst all 4 partners.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Andy, some reports yesterday around Super Rugby. You able to let us in on what's happening on that front?
Yeah, look, a little bit premature in my view, in terms of we're still working through the finer detail. It's fair to say that we're pretty progressed and quite close to finalising that. So, you know, as has been communicated, we hopefully will be able to confirm that from our side in the next couple of days. I think the challenges around the Rugby Championship and finalising the schedule have sort of taken priority over the last 72 hours or so.
Are you comfortable, Andy, with what you've got out of those discussions re Super Rugby and what looks like the format? You're happy with where things are at there, and that, I guess, reinforces your ability to work with New Zealand?
Yeah, look, Sam, it's fair to say it's been a very long and protracted process. We both came to the table with very different competition models and philosophies, but you know, we've consistently worked through the different options, and I think where we've got to, you know, we've always got to keep in mind the importance of delivering on those high performance imperatives, and obviously having a product in the market that's going to grow value over time. So, you know, I think what we've agreed to is for the next 2 years, we've got a model that we're gonna consider, but we will continue to be open-minded and look at different alternatives if we believe that those will deliver a different and a better outcome going forward. But for the next 2 years, once we've agreed terms, that model will be in place.
And any is that model being explored with any Japanese involvement at the end of seasons or throughout finals, or is that likely to come perhaps afterwards once the world's back to some form of normality?
Yeah, not at this stage, Christy. In terms of anything in next year or even possibly 2023. You know, because at the moment we've got to just deal with what we know with absolute certainty in front of us, and even just running the competition between the two markets is not without its challenges if COVID persists into the first or second quarters of next year.
Andy, just touching on Steve Hansen's comments that Australia would be stronger with 3 Super Rugby teams. Do you envision at any point shrinking Australia's Super Rugby teams?
No, not at all.
All right, guys. And
just one quick one, mate. Sorry. Yeah, Nick Taylor, mate. Andy, just very quickly, you say you hope to make a decision within 24, 48 hours here in Perth. Is that realistic, given you won't know what day is available until after the weekend's AFL games? And are you likely to put it on Sunday because traditionally they don't play their finals on Sundays?
Oh, Nick, I'm only sort of making these positions or statements based on information that I'm dealing with the stadium directly. So I know there's a fair bit resting on the weekend, but the communication that I've had from the stadium is that we may be in a position to have some clarity before then. So we'll wait and see what they come back with.
You'd be happy with the Sunday game, maybe even moving that to an afternoon, given that it is a Sunday? Oh,
yeah, to be honest with you, we haven't really contemplated. We've really been focusing on a Friday and a Saturday. As I understood, Saturday, Sundays were priority for the AFL. So I think it's fair to say we'll look at that whole weekend and get the right date that will enable us. The most important thing for me is to be able to put the test match on and deliver a really good product for the people of West Australia, because I think they've been really patient and very cooperative, certainly the government in terms of having the flexibility to move this potentially 3 times.
Yeah, I think traditionally they don't play on their finals on Sundays, and I know they've always grumbled about rugby being played on the turf before an AFL game. So I guess wait and see, is it? Yeah,
no, I've got to be led by the stadium and the West Australian government in terms of how they're going to see that rolling out.
Sure. Now, you guys are already here, and obviously they're going to go. The All Blacks will have to go into a soft quarantine. Do you know when they intend to leave yet?
At the latest on Thursday. In order for them to, they need to leave by Thursday if we're going to be able to play on a Friday.
Yeah.
So I would expect that they would need to be in the country by Thursday night.
Yeah. Thanks, mate.
Andy, just one more from me on the super format. I know it's not confirmed yet, but how did you weigh up the pros and cons of playing Super AU and the benefits that we saw from that competition this year compared to, I suppose, the high performance aspect of testing yourself against the Kiwis week in, week out? And yeah, how did you sort of land on what the right balance was there?
Oh, it was a combination of factors. I think the high performance element is important. You know, we've been in a really robust conversation and process with all of our super clubs in RUPA as we've gone through this. I think the other imperative in having this new format, it gives certainty to both to all the super clubs of 7 home and 7 away games, which is a big improvement on what they had through the Super AU. The other thing we can't ignore is it will ensure that we've got a minimum of 3 games a weekend on the platform versus the 2, and one team always having a bye every weekend. So there are some of those benefits, but it's not detracting from the fact, mate, that the Super AU this year was a really good competition and very well received, and certainly did very well from a broadcast perspective. So we are confident that the boys will continue to perform and deliver another good tournament next year.